Hello and welcome to the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul Season 2, Episode 4, Gloves Off. And at this point in the show, we might want to just parenthetically call it Better Call Mike Ehrmantraut because this was basically his episode. From the beginning to the end, and I'm going to start with this little stinger they open with, or not a stinger. What do they call these things? Teaser, opener. You know how they do this in Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. They have the thing that they start with that is connected to the rest of the story, but maybe isn't doesn't flow directly into the next thing. Yeah, that part. It felt a little bit weird to me. It almost felt like out of place because we see Mike come into his house. He's all shuffling and old and, and then he turns and we see that his left eye is just completely busted and swollen shut. And he goes and gets some juice out of the fridge or whatever. And it's just sort of this, telling us hey, Mike got beat up. And there's a point in that intro where I'm thinking, okay, well, we ended the last episode on Mike getting hired by Nacho to go and deal with this guy, whoever it was. So maybe now, obviously this is after that, or maybe not obviously, but it seemed very likely that was after that. And I thought maybe we skip over that. Maybe we don't see exactly what went down and we see consequences happen later. But no, it's just a weird out of sequence bit. I don't know how I felt about that because later in the episode we do see everything leading up to Mike getting busted up. I'm of two minds. I understand how you can argue that it works because you have Mike and now we find out in the episode Tuco is the guy he's going after. We know for sure that neither one of them is going to die because we understand that this is a prequel and both of those guys are in Breaking Bad. So there is an interesting angle to this in that it creates some kind of tension and question okay, well, what is going to happen other than obviously Mike doesn't kill Tuco and Tuco doesn't kill Mike because they live into Breaking Bad. So I like it from that angle in that it sort of adds some kind of mystery to the episode where you might be wondering, why do we care about this thing that Mike's being asked to do? But it didn't flow for me. The way it played, you see him and then you see Jimmy and then you see him again. In the sequence, I mean, you can figure out, okay, well, now his eye's not swollen shut. Now things aren't messed up. But just something about how that ran felt off for me. But we do get a little bit of Jimmy McGill in this episode. We basically pick off right where we left up. Yeah, that's the words I meant to use. He's getting just completely dressed down by his bosses at Davis and Maine because he ran this commercial without their approval, and you really do get a sense that these people are not unreasonable with their complaints because it's not just, I mean, he has this argument that I assume most of the viewers would have is well, look how well this worked, guys. We got all these calls. We wouldn't have got calls from these people otherwise. It was, minimal expenditure. He spends all the good things, but the Davis and Maine people are you kind of went over our heads. You're not the boss here. Regardless of your little rationalizations about your 10-second conversation about maybe we should do a commercial and being in head of the outreach department, you need to pass these things through us. And the more compelling argument that I think I missed, and if you're not someone who's involved in the machinations of legal firms, you might not have thought about, is that this Davis and Maine is not solely focused on this one Sandpiper incident. That's not the only thing they have to do as a law firm. They've been here for a long time before the Sandpiper lawsuit, and they hope to be there for a long time after. And the complaint that they level at Jimmy is, hey, maybe this did great for the Sandpiper incident, but how does this reflect on the law firm as a whole? You didn't think about how this is going to play for all of our other customers, for anybody else. Do we want to look like the kind of people who just play commercials on the TV? Or are we classier than that? And I thought that that was an interesting angle I hadn't come up with. And it's really interesting because Jimmy in this episode is still Jimmy. We're still sympathetic with him. He's still the main character. But you really kind of start to see some of what you saw as Breaking Bad played out as well, where I think there are viewers who are going to be angry at the people at Davis and Maine and later on at Chuck for how they both act and react to Jimmy. But those people are not wrong, and Jimmy is. Jimmy did do the wrong thing. He did run a commercial without permission. He knew he needed permission. You see him in, I think it's a couple episodes, or maybe no, it was last episode. He's like, I'm going to go ask for permission, and then he thinks, no, I'm not going to go ask for permission. Like, he knew that was the thing he needed to do. Then he lied to Kim about it. He's breaking the rules, and what Chuck says to him later is right. As much as you don't want to like Chuck and as sort of unsavory as he is in kind of how he's played, Chuck is right about what he's saying. And so they don't fire Jimmy. They say, listen, you are on thin ice, but you're still an employee. Don't screw anything else up. And then we flash over to back at HHM where Kim is being called on the carpet. And again, man, Kim is such a fascinating character because she defends herself to a point, but they ask, why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you say something about this commercial? And she doesn't say, I didn't know that he hadn't told you. She doesn't rat him out. And that's such, I mean, man, because you can tell she's betrayed and she's pissed at him. Like, she's not happy with Jimmy McGill right now, but she still respects him and likes him enough to not throw him under the bus, to take responsibility for his screw up when it was not her fault. That's huge. That's huge to me. I mean, that says volumes about how Kim feels about Jimmy, despite the fact that she's very reserved. You know, we don't see her be super expressive, but man, there is a bedrock of something there that she really feels for him, and yet he is just doing his best to chip away at that, because we do see he comes to the building. He tries to call her as he's in the meeting, or she's in the meeting with Chuck and what's his face? I forget, Hamlin. Anyway, he tries to call her, and of course her phone is already in the bin because Chuck's in the room and no phone's in the room with him. And you see her leave, and Chuck just says to Hamlin, well, what are we going to do about this? And that kind of cuts away. We don't see Chuck say to Hamlin, hey, you should fire that Kim person or at least demote her really bad. But we do see that she has been demoted. Jimmy comes to the building. He's freaking out. He's like, where's she at? Where's Kim? He thinks maybe she's been fired. He goes to her desk and like everything's been cleared out. Great little cameo from the guy buffing the floors. I don't know if that's somebody who I should recognize from Breaking Bad or other seasons or whatever, but it was real. I don't know. It was just kind of cool seeing him there with the buffer and the Jimmy walking. Something about that scene I liked a lot. But he goes and he finally finds her, and she's stuck down in the filing room doing the most rookie, mediocre, banal work that they could possibly find for her to do. She doesn't have her desk anymore. She doesn't have anything left. And she says, Jimmy's like, I've got to go talk to McGill. I've got to go, or not McGill, Hamlin. I need to go talk to Hamlin, make this right. And she says, no. You're going to screw it up. You're going to make it wrong. If you go talk to him, our relationship's over. And there's a great moment where he thought, is it not over already? Which is kind of what we're thinking as the viewers. Like, how are they still together in any capacity after this massive, massive betrayal? But somehow she's still got something in her heart for him. Somehow she's able to excuse, at the very least, if not forgive, what he's done. And so Jimmy doesn't go talk to Hamlin. He goes and talks to Chuck. or rather tries to. And there's a great moment as he's going to the house where he's walking past the mailbox. He has his cell phone and stuff in his pocket, and he knows that Chuck has this weird electrical phobia / allergy that isn't real. It's a psychological condition, and he considers not putting his stuff in the mailbox because he's so mad and he's so passionate about, getting Kim back her job. But he stops and he thinks and he does it. And you could read that as he doesn't want to make Chuck mad. He wants to have the best leverage that he possibly can. And that probably is in his head. But there's also, I think, the angle that these two guys are still brothers. And Jimmy, for as much as many hurtful things as Chuck has said about him, and probably as much as Jimmy kind of despises Chuck, he still also kind of loves him because he's still his brother. And so he puts the stuff in the mailbox. He goes into the house, and to bolster what I'm saying about the brothers even more, he finds Chuck really bad up on the couch with his disease that he has in his mind that really does affect him physically. I mean, he's just breaking down, like shivering and covered in this space blanket thing that's supposed to, mitigate the radio waves. And Jimmy doesn't, haul him out of bed and start screaming at him or anything like that. And again, you could make the argument that he's just doing the most that he can to get the best possible result from talking to Chuck. But the way I read it was Jimmy's genuinely concerned. He genuinely is bothered by the fact that Chuck is sick. He gets another space blanket, puts it out. He didn't have to do that. I mean, he could have just sat there all night and waited for Chuck to get better. But no, he sits there, he watches over his big brother, and only when Chuck is awake and only when Jimmy knows that he's mostly okay does he start in with the, hey, you're pissed at me, fine, I get that, but don't take this out on Kim. And he tells Chuck what Kim didn't tell Chuck and Hamlin. He tells him she didn't know. She did not know what I was doing. She didn't know that I was going over the heads of the guys at Davis and Maine. She thought that everything was kosher, put her back in her place where she belongs. And Chuck says, no, I'm not doing it. And Jimmy goes to an interesting place. He says, I know you want me out of the law. I know you want me doing something else. If you'll put Kim back where she belongs, I'll quit. I'll never be a lawyer again. I'll stop doing what I'm doing. But all you got to do is put her back. And Chuck, in a very interesting move, he doesn't say, no, that's not why I did that to Kim, or no. All he says is, if I did that, then me moving Kim down could be seen as extortion, and that's against the rules. And it's such a great contrast between how Chuck thinks and how Jimmy thinks, because Chuck may be heartless and cold, but he really believes in the rule of law and doing the right thing and playing by the rules. And so does Kim. Kim says to him as well, what you did was against the rules. That's why it was wrong. The results don't matter. Both of these people are saying to him, the ends do not justify the means. And more we're seeing that Jimmy McGill does not believe that. He doesn't buy that the ends don't justify the means. For him, the ends are everything, and the means just, it doesn't matter. You could slit throats and, lie and cheat, but as long as you get to a good place and, have accomplished something good in the world, he thinks he gets to get a blank check. And Chuck tells him, no, you don't. And I'm not gonna promise you anything for, if you quit the law practice. And it's a great moment where Jimmy's just yelling at him, like trying sort of this last temptation of Christ kind of a thing. Not the last temptation of Christ, that different, just the regular temptation. Anyway, but he's trying to, he's there like whispering in his ear, or more like screaming in his ear, like, hey, Get down in the dirt and roll around with me, man. Like, do the wrong thing for once. It'll be fun for you. You'll get me out of the law. You'll get Slippin' Jimmy away from his machine gun. That'll be awesome, right? And Chuck does not budge because Chuck isn't what Jimmy wants him to be. Chuck isn't that hypocrite. He's, again, might be a jerk, but he stands for the rule of law. And if the day comes that Chuck does go behind, do something nefarious, that's going to be, that's going to be good. Fascinating. I suspect that day might eventually come, but I don't know what it's going to take. Regardless, he doesn't, Chuck says, no, first of all, you're shooting yourself in the foot already. I don't have to get you out of the law practice. You're not going to be long for the lawyer world as far as I can tell with the stuff that you're doing. So I don't even have to, negotiate with you. And secondly, I'm not breaking the rules. And so we kind of leave them at that impasse with Chuck saying to Jimmy, no, you're just, too bad, bud. And I actually would be interested to see if he takes Jimmy's protest under advisement and puts Kim back, because I don't think he has anything against Kim, but he does have something against Jimmy, and Kim's related to Jimmy sort of indirectly. That's tough. And also, I would like to add, my wife had a really interesting observation when we were watching this scene. She said, wouldn't it be interesting if Jimmy had like a tape recorder in his pocket in the sort of classic movie spy type thing, and he was taping his conversation with Chuck, trying to get incriminating evidence against Chuck that he was doing something wrong and breaking the rules. And I thought about it and I was like, how do you know he didn't? I mean, we don't see it, and I don't believe that he did, but there's a part of me that thinks that Jimmy might not be above that kind of trickery against Chuck. But we don't see anything like that, and Chuck didn't crack and do what Jimmy wanted him to do. So, back to what I would say is really the main plot of the episode, although maybe not quite as meaty. We see Mike being hired by Nacho to take out Tuco. And Nacho has this whole setup planned out where he's telling Mike, listen, me and Tuco, I don't think we ever really got the sense up until now how much of that these guys are partners. But apparently they're like co-owners of this business. Nacho's sort of the second-hand guy, but he's right there. He's right with Tuco. They're both sort of at the top level here. And it really brings home how much risk Nacho's taking going off on his own. Because, I kind of assumed he was sort of a lower-level drug dealer who was working for Tuco. But now we see, no, they're sort of co-business owners in a sense, and Tuco's at the top, but Nacho's right there with him. Nacho's putting a lot on the line. He's not just this guy who's, hungry for an extra buck and willing to take the risk. He has aspirations. And even though he doesn't say it to Mike, I think that he has plans to take over what Tuco's doing. And he says, listen, says to Mike, I need you to do this. We're going to set it up like this. It's going to look like one of these, other flunkies that he meets here took him out. We have this whole setup where he parks here and you're going to park next to him and you can, shoot him through the window and then take off and go to the interstate and you're good. But Mike has a lot of objections, and Mike has clearly done something like this before. Or, we do find out later on he was in Vietnam, or they heavily imply it at least. But he's got a lot of really specific objections. Like, okay, it works out if you do this, but what if somebody's behind me and I can't pull out of the parking space after I've done the deed? What if, there's a traffic snag? What if somebody gets my plates? And he has all of these sort of really good objections because he's a cop and also, I think, a criminal at the same time. And to a certain degree, I think he doesn't want to kill anybody. Mike is sort of on this path similar to Jimmy. He's not a murderer per se yet. He's killed people that he thought really needed to be killed, but he's not this gun for hire at the moment. He's not a mercenary. He'll back you up and he'll do what needs to be done, but he's not interested in this cold-blooded killing, even of somebody like Tuco, which I think is really fascinating. And he says, he proposes an alternate plan at first. He says, listen, better idea, somebody over in this position over here, get a scope. You can hit him from, several hundred yards away, get away, nobody's going to see you. That's what I would prefer to do. Nacho says, whatever, man. I have this plan. You have your plan. Your plan's fine as long as he's dead at the end. Great job. Kill him. So Mike goes and he meets up with the gun guy. I don't know if he's been in Better Call Saul yet. I can't remember if he was in season 1 or not. I know we see him when Walt first goes to buy a gun. And Walt realizes he needs protection. I think Jimmy gives him the phone number or whatever, but Walt goes to this guy and says, I want this untraceable firearm for quote unquote protection. And the guy's like, if you need it for protection, you don't need one with the number filed off. And Walt's like, it's for protection, bud. Really? Stop questioning me. So that guy shows up and he's got a bunch of rifles to sell to Mike. And they have what you could call a little bit of a filler conversation with, around the guns. If you're not a gun aficionado, it's not going to mean too much to you. And I know a little bit about guns, and some of this stuff I was just like, this guy, there's a lot of specifics somebody researched for this conversation to be authentic. But it was interesting because you get a sense that Mike really knows his stuff. I mean, this guy is the gun seller. He knows his stuff, but Mike also has a bead on what firearms he wants, and he has experience, and we get that insight back into, I think he gives him it's an M1, I think. Gun aficionados, please feel free to comment and tell me where I'm wrong. But he gives him, it's the third gun, and he's like, this is not quite as powerful long range, but it's a lot more reliable, and a lot lighter, and, it's the issue that the Army had, and Mike picks that up, and you can tell that he's familiar with this gun. He's looking at it. He pulls the bolts. He's sighting it down. Like he's remembering holding this gun in the past. And they talk about how they used to have wood stocks, but the wood would warp and, bend in the rain and in the heat. And Mike says, yeah, you'd think they would have researched that before they sent them into a jungle, which is where I'm getting. Again, Mike doesn't come out and look at the camera and say, I was in Vietnam and bad things happened, but you can pretty much infer that Mike was in Vietnam and bad things happened. But he's almost ready to buy the gun. And then something, I think possibly the reference to Vietnam and thinking about killing and what that did to him in that time, he puts it down and he says, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm not doing this. I can't kill somebody in cold blood like this. And he sends the guy away. And the little great character exchange where he offers to pay him just for his time. And the guy's like, listen, I can't exactly go public with this business, so you keep your money, and when you need a gun, you let me know. I make my money in repeats. And Mike goes off, and he goes to Nacho, and he says, I've got a different plan. I've got a plan. And it's kind of funny because at the end of the last episode, Nacho had said to Mike, there's someone who needs to go away. And now Mike literally proposes to Nacho, hey, what if we actually make Tuco go away? We don't kill him, because killing him, no matter how much it looks like a random drug dealer did it, is going to bring the cartel that he's connected to down on our heads. What like we see happens in Breaking Bad with the two brothers as they show up to avenge Tuco. But I think for Mike, that's really an excuse. I think Mike could easily get away with it if he wanted to, but Mike, in my mind, does not want to kill someone right now. He's not there. We saw it at the end of the last episode with the vet where the guy's like, listen, you want like next level pay, you got to do next level work. And the next level work is shooting people in the head occasionally or breaking kneecaps. And Mike's not there. Mike isn't willing to do that, but he's like Jimmy, he's being pushed along by the, sort of events and the turns of fate to have to eventually be that person, but he's not there yet. And we're seeing that journey happen, and we see him come up with this alternate solution. He says, listen, I can make Tuco go away. It won't bounce back on you. It won't bring the cartel down on us, and I can avoid killing someone. And so what Mike does is this really, it's really a lot of fun. First of all, he calls the cops. They're still at the same location where Nacho and Tuco are going to be meeting their suppliers, and you see the Tampico guy, who, if you haven't seen Breaking Bad, I don't know for sure why you're watching Better Call Saul, but kind of spoilers for Breaking Bad. There's the guy that Walt has chained up in his basement and eventually ends up killing him. And he talks about the Tampico Furniture Company that he works for. And you see the Tampico van outside the restaurant, and then you see that guy. I know, it's just prequel stuff and it's silly, but that little fun little Easter egg. He kind of also, like, Nacho is giving everybody, Tuco is giving everybody the stink eye. He has his lie detector thing where he looks at people in the eye and is like, waiting for you to crack as some indication that you've screwed him over or something. And so this guy's like, what, can I go now? What's going on? And it kind of ties back into what we did see in Breaking Bad, where, yeah, he was willing to kill Walt because that was maybe his only option, but these are also just some guys who are criminals also, but maybe not the scum of humanity that you want to think they are. Regardless, that's a little side thing. He gets in his van and leaves. Mike calls the cops and says, there's two guys with guns fighting in the restaurant. Come and get. And he puts on his old man voice, which is pretty great. And then once he's waited a minute, he grabs his car and pulls into the parking lot and dings Tuco's car just a little bit. And Tuco has a pretty sweet ride. He has spinners. He's got a nice, like, classic American muscle car. It's his baby. And Mike just hits it and then gets out and walks by Tuco and Nacho like nothing is happening. And Tuco's like, what just happened? Excuse me? And Mike goes up and orders a chalupa or something. And Tuco comes to him and he says, you just hit my car. And Mike's like, no, I don't think I did. And he's still putting on the old man act, which is really, really great. And basically draws Tuco into a confrontation. He lets Tuco see that he has a reasonable amount of money in his wallet. He, sort of goads Tuco. He gives Tuco the option to exchange insurance information. He says, listen, I'll give you my insurance information. We'll make this right. I'm sorry I dinged it, but, it's not that big a deal anyway. And really pushes Tuco to the point where he's really mad. And Mike knows that Tuco can be pushed this way because Nacho told him. And there's a great building of tension because you see that Tuco's about to go off and start wailing on Mike. And you kind of get what the plan is, but you know that the cops need to be there. And Tuco's getting madder and madder and madder, and there's not any sirens happening at all. And finally, Mike kind of stalls it out and spins it, and eventually times it just right where the cops are showing up. Nacho's like, we got to get out of here, man. Tuco is, at that point, too infuriated to listen and goes to hit Mike. Or, actually, I don't know that he actually goes to hit him. I know Mike, at some point, Mike has grabbed Nacho and will not let him go, and grabs with the other hand around the post behind him and just like hangs on as the cops are coming in to arrest, to investigate this, report of shots fired or the fight at the restaurant or whatever it was. And so he makes it really look, because Tuco's just punching him to get away at this point, but he makes it look like Tuco's just wailing on this defenseless old man. The cops see it. They take Tuco into custody. Nacho's long gone by that point. Mike has a giant black bruised eye, but he did accomplish it. And at the end of the episode, we see him meet up with Nacho, and Nacho gives him 25 grand, which is a lot of money, but not the 50 grand that he promised him if he would kill Tuco. And Nacho says to him, you got beat up really bad. You know, you're an old guy already. And now you have, you know, what are you going to do? Like, why would you take the extra beating for less money when you could have just solved it simply the way I wanted to solve it? And Mike doesn't answer. Mike just walks away, and it really is a very poignant ending for the episode, because it does raise that question, and it does sort of put that thought in our minds, like, Mike does not want to kill. That's his line that he doesn't want to cross. Just like Jimmy in the previous season, where Jimmy didn't want to, you know, he was willing to bend the rules, but he was going to do the right thing. I think Mike is also at the point where he believes in good criminals and bad criminals. Like he talked to in Price in season 1. He says, you're either going to be a good criminal or a bad criminal. And Mike thinks he's a good criminal. He thinks he's a good man who's breaking the law. And that is going to be pushed, I think, in future episodes. I think that he's going to have to look at himself and really question whether he's a good man. Just like Jimmy has had to look at himself and really question whether he wants to be a good man. But despite my small little quibble with the opening, and it didn't ruin anything for me, I just had some, I wasn't sure how I felt about it. Despite that, another solid episode for this season of Better Call Saul. We're already almost halfway through, guys. I assume there are only 10 episodes again. I've not checked. Maybe they extended it to like 12, but we're pretty far into the season, and the Mike and Saul storylines still have not converged, and they're both escalating pretty far. Whenever those two come together, fire and ice is what I'm expecting. There's going to be something big. When Mike has to help Jimmy and or vice versa, we're talking something exciting, I think. Stay tuned. That's all I've got to say. Until next week, I'm Albert Berg. You've been watching the Human Echoes recap for Better Call Saul. That's all I have to say.